Okay, this is lecture 4 for EDD 939 Module 6, and we're going to be looking at the learning organization, the concept of the learning organization in this lecture. And I know I've said this before, and sometimes it doesn't come true, but this will probably be a little bit of a shorter lecture, maybe. We'll see. I think it will, but we'll see. But the learning organization is a really key concept and a key idea for strategic acting, strategic leadership as a whole. It ties in very much to systems thinking. So if you've been through EDD 918, we talked about systems thinking in there, and the learning organization is one of the key components to it. And again, you know me, I like to set parameters and terms and things like that. So one of the first things that I want to look at is what a learning organization is not. And I bring this up because I worked in an organization that prided itself on being a learning organization. And they talked about it. I remember being in the interview, and they talked about we are a learning organization. And it was a buzzword that everyone used because it was a pretty popular term at the time. But I can tell you that by the time I left that organization, there were things starting to happen that were helping us become more of a learning organization. But when I first walked into that place, it was not a learning organization. Rather, it was the criteria of this first slide. So a learning organization is not an organization with an emphasis on continuing education. And that was one of the things that this organization pointed to. If you said, well, what makes you a learning organization? Well, we greatly emphasize continuing ed. And they did. As many businesses and companies and organizations do. If you wanted to get a bachelor's degree, they had quite a few employees who had either no post-secondary education or an associate's degree. And to move up into higher positions, most of them required a bachelor's degree. And so if you'd worked there for at least a certain amount of time and were in good standing, they would pay for X number of courses per semester, and basically they would pay for your bachelor's degree for you to complete that. And I've worked at a few different organizations do that. A lot of them do, and I think it's a great thing. Or if you had a bachelor's, you could get money towards your master's degree. If it had, if it connected overall to the business and business areas and things like that. My brother, not the company he works for now, but another company he worked for, they paid for his MBA because it connected. And so, there's lots of them out there, but that doesn't make you a learning organization. That's a human resource benefit, right? And they would say, well, but we put an emphasis on it. Well, they put an emphasis on it as far as putting money behind it, encouraging it, and then telling people in talent reviews, well, if you want to move up, you need to get your bachelor's or whatever. So, or certifications and things like that. The other thing that a learning organization is not, and this is what was going on in this organization as well, an organization with a robust training and development department and or agenda. And this organization had a great training and development department, one of the best I've ever seen. They had really great training programs for new associates who came into the organization. They had really great ongoing training for people. So, it was a stellar training and development department. But and they had a robust agenda with that. So making sure people were staying up to date with best practices and current thinking, everything, plus just in general overall development for individuals. So they had a great program, great department, great agenda. But that doesn't make you a learning organization. And that's what was going on here. Because, again, you say, well, what makes you a learning organization? Well, look, we encourage people to get more degrees, and we have a really great training and development department, and we offer lots and lots and lots of training. Okay, That's not what we mean by a learning organization. And then the third thing here is, nor is it where isolated and individual learners are scattered through the organization. And that one you don't see as much, but you may have learners in different places throughout your organization who are practicing the elements of learning organization that we're going to talk about here in a minute. But that doesn't mean your organization as a whole is a learning organization. It means you might have a start if you can identify these individuals and get things moving. So what is a learning organization? Well, a learning organization is an organization that facilitates the learning of members and continually transforms itself. And both are important. So let's start up with the learning. And you'll notice I put in parentheses, not education or training. And I would add this, it's more than knowledge acquisition. So when we say an organization is a learning organization, that's why the things I put up above, that does not necessarily make it a learning organization. Now, those things might be present in a learning organization. They might encourage continuing education. They might have a great training and development department. But those are knowledge acquisition elements. And knowledge acquisition does not equate to learning. And you're probably familiar with this concept, especially if you teach a class. Especially a class that is content heavy and then has tests, traditional tests involved at the end. You know that you have some students who learn the material for the test. And as soon as that final exam is over, they walk out the door and they've probably forgotten most, if not all of it, by the next day. So they acquired information, and that might even be a better term than knowledge. They acquired knowledge or information, but they didn't learn anything. And this is really the concept that I hope comes through in our EDD program as a whole and in the individual courses. The truth of the matter is, doctoral programs are not as much about knowledge acquisition. You're in a doctoral program to become a learner, if you're not already. Now, most people, if they're engaging in a doctoral program, they're already a learner, and we want to highlight and enhance that even more. And it's still, it troubles me when here and there a doctoral student will approach doctoral work as give me knowledge acquisition. That's not really what we do here. We're learning. We're acquiring more concepts, bigger picture, and we're learning how to learn for the long term. And so that's what a learning organization is doing. So it facilitates the learning, not just the education training, not just knowledge acquisition, but the learning of members. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to do that, but it does that through reflective practicing, thinking through after action reviews, all of those kind of things we've already talked about, and more that we still will. All of that is part of facilitating the learning of members and continuously transforms itself. And what we mean by that is it then takes the learning from these experiences and says, now what do we do differently? How do we change? How do we adapt? How are we agile from the last lecture? So all of that is part of transforming itself. And then a definition of a learning organization, it's a paraphrase of his definition, but this is from Peter Senge. Peter Senge wrote a book called The Fifth Discipline. He has written a lot about systems thinking and, again, learning organizations. Systems thinking is a key part of being a learning organization. And so he deals a lot with this. And his idea of a learning organization is it's a group of people working together collectively to enhance capacities to create results that they really care about. Group of people working together collectively to enhance capacities to create results that they really care about. And so you'll notice there's nothing in his description there about like formal training and formal education. Again, that can be a part of it because that might be how you enhance capacities, but it doesn't have to be that way. A learning organization is not focused on necessarily classroom content kind of things, but it's focused on our people learning. And this is where I said the organization I was a part of that prided itself on being a learning organization. As I was learning about this, I kept coming back and thinking, they're not. Because all of the focus was on training, content delivery, programmatic kind of things. But there wasn't, in the early stages, like I said, by the time I left, we'd started doing a lot more work with this and things were moving along. But there wasn't that focus on working together collectively to enhance capacities to create the results that we really care about. And so that happens in a learning organization. Now, a key component, and this is where we'll spend the rest of our time, but a key component of a learning organization is this idea of double loop learning. And this came from, primarily from an organizational researcher, practitioner, professor, scholar, by the name of Chris Argyris. And he just passed away in 2013. But he was at Harvard the last part of his career, I think at Yale before that. So, pretty prestigious schools. And he worked with Donald Schoen on this, who was a systems thinker as well and researcher. But Argyris, this is kind of his main idea, and Schoen worked with him on this. And it's this idea of double loop learning. And this is a key component of being a learning organization. And so what is double loop learning? Well, it starts with the idea of a feedback loop. And so Argyris would talk about organizations having feedback loops. Now, when we say feedback, too often what our brains go to is, I'm going to give you feedback on your presentation, meaning I'm going to critique you on how you did, tell you what you did well, what you didn't do so well, where we talk about feedback in employees' reviews, or let's get feedback from customers. Now, and that's kind of part of what Argyris was referring to here. But a feedback loop is any kind of data and information and feedback from the system as a whole. And that's where it's tied into systems thinking. So it isn't just the words or thoughts or emotions that a person uses to describe it, but I'm also tuning into all kinds of other pieces of data and information from the system as a whole to get feedback. And then I'm acting on that feedback. And so the idea then is it goes into either single loop learning or double loop learning. And of course, both can be good. However, if we're truly going to be a learning organization and moving forward and continuously transforming ourselves and in working together collectively to enhance capacities, as Senge says, what Argyris says is we need to be engaging more in double loop learning. So, but let's go back. Single loop learning. Single loop learning is when I'm getting feedback from the system and there are errors, as he calls them, or corrections that could be made and need to be made within the process, within the system. And the single loop learning is where I take that feedback, I see those errors, and I make corrections to my existing policies, strategies, procedures, tactics. Okay? And I'm going to give an illustration here in a minute that might help you understand this more. So I'm speaking a little abstractly. Double loop learning is where I take the feedback from the system as a whole, all the wide variety of sources. I take the feedback as a whole and I examine my current structures, policies, procedures, strategies, tactics in light of the feedback. And then I ask myself, does the current system, the current way we are doing things, help me, or do we need to change those underlying assumptions and strategies and policies and procedures to correct this? So do you understand? I know it's hard, I'm asking you and you're not with me, but do you understand the difference? So single loop says, okay, there's some corrections that need to be made. I'm going to tweak what we're already doing, if you will. Whereas double loop says, maybe I need to change the whole thing. Now, understand, though, it isn't just, oh, that's not working, so let's try a new set of strategies. Double loop learning means I'm engaging and I'm thinking and we're having dialogue and discussion and saying, is this working? So, again, this might be kind of a bad example or a weak example, I should say, but hopefully it helps. Let's say we own a coffee shop, right? And it has a drive-through window and everything. So we highly emphasize the quality of our drinks, right? And we tell our new associates, we want to make sure that we get everything just right when we're assembling the beverage. And so what happens is we're running our coffee shop and we get feedback from the system, customers, as well as other things, and that there's really long wait times. And people are unhappy about that. So single loop learning might say, well, what's the problem? Well, maybe we need to hire more people, or we need to, right? So we're making tweaks to the system. And again, I'm not sure this is the best example. But double loop learning would have us sit back and go, well, wait a minute, what's really contributing to the backlog here? Well, we highly emphasize quality of drinks. Maybe we've made our associates so afraid to put out a drink for fear that it's not absolutely perfect, that's slowing the whole process down. And so we don't need to really hire more people. What we need to do is talk about, okay, when we say we want a high quality drink, if you follow the formula, that's a high quality drink. So just make it the way you've been told how to make it, and that's fine. So let's clarify. Again, I'm not sure that's the greatest example, but hopefully that helps you understand. Single loop learning just looks at the current strategies and processes and tactics and says, let's make minor tweaks and see if we can correct the problem. And sometimes that's appropriate. Sometimes that's all you need to do, right? But other times, to truly be a learning organization, you need to engage in double loop learning, which says, okay, here's the feedback. Instead of just tweaking our strategies and tactics, let's really dig in and think, are these the best way? Or do we need to get rid of those and try something completely different? And why did we pick these? What's contributing to this thought processes and everything else? And that's where we get into some of the things we're talking about, mental models and implicit assumptions and beliefs and engaging in dialogue. And so to really be a learning organization, you need to be engaged in this concept of double loop learning, as Ardress and Schoen talked about. So, hey, less than 20 minutes on this lecture, so it is shorter than normal if I hurry up and finish here. So I hope this unit has been helpful to you. As I said, made it a little shorter as far as lectures go as a whole, give you a little breathing space, and we will see you in Module 7 when we talk about strategic influence.